today and just say thank you to the Hungarian worship team. I guarantee you, if you come to the United States, our worship team will not be learning songs in Hungarian. And so the fact that you've taken the time to really work hard and learn all these songs in English for our benefit so that we can feel like we're a part, I know that that represents a lot of work on your part. And all of us who don't speak Hungarian, which is most of us here, we are very, very grateful that you reached down to pick us up. So thank you very much. This lesson that we're going to do today is about reverence and worship. But before I start, I just wanted to mention that a lot of the things that I'm talking about over these next few days, I've taken the time to write about in my second book, a book that I wrote on worship, which is available. I think it's €8 if you're from the European Union monetary system, and I don't know exactly what it translates to in Hungarian florins, 2,500 florins. But I go into a lot more detail than I have time to do in these 5 or 6 lessons that I'm doing this weekend. I go into a lot of detail. I get into a lot of Bible, and it's a very thorough treatment of the subject. So I would encourage you, if you want to know more, if you want to dig in a little bit better. Unfortunately, it's only in English right now, and I have 2 versions of it. I have a written version, and I also have an audiobook version, or it's also available as an ebook if you have a Kindle or some other device. An electronic reader, you can order it through IPI Books as well. So I just wanted to mention that. And those are available back in the back there. This lesson about reverence in worship is as much about our personal spirituality as it is about leading in worship. Because I believe that who we are in secret is who we are. That is the reality of us. If in secret we are not righteous people, then of course we can put on the righteous show, but of course God knows who we are is who we are. Who we are when we're alone is who we are in reality. And so this lesson is about really developing our personal reverence in our own walk with God, in our own relationship with God, because that's what translates to what we do up here when we're leading people. You can't lead a person to a place you've never been. Jesus calls that the blind leading the blind. And so we need to lead people. We're trying to lead people into the Holy of Holies. And so if we're going to be the Holy of Holy tour guide, then we need to make sure that we are familiar with the place. Yesterday afternoon, one of the brothers here in the church in Hungary, who is has a master's degree in tourism, he took me out and showed me the city. And as we walked around, he had all kinds of things that he was pointing out to me, and he knew Hungarian history, and he knew all about the sights and the sounds and the places and what happened there and when it happened. And I thought, man, this is the best thing ever. I'm learning so much, and I could do that because he's been there. He knows the place. And in the same way, if we're going to lead people into the presence of God, we need to be people who are familiar with being in the presence of God. And so that's what this lesson is about. Let's read together in Hebrews chapter 12. If you're looking for Hebrews 28, you won't find it. We'll read in Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 28, where he says, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." He says in that verse that acceptable worship is worship with reverence and awe. Which means that if we come to God without reverence and without awe, then that's unacceptable. And I think that's one thing we need to understand as we try to help our churches worship. I believe that there's been a lot of unacceptable worship going on because people are distracted, they're unfocused, they're not thinking about what they're singing, they're not directing their thoughts upward toward God, outward toward one another, inward toward themselves. And if we're spacing out, if we're distracted in our worship, then how can it be acceptable worship? If we're singing songs thinking about lunch, or if we're singing songs thinking about the fight we had with our roommate on the way to church, or our wife or our husband, then how can that be acceptable worship? Acceptable worship is God-focused. It's God-oriented. It's God-word in the direction of God. And so we need to understand that. Now, there are different actions of acceptable worship. Flip on over to Psalm 95, and we'll sort of break this down just for a couple of minutes. He starts off the psalm, he says, "Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song." So he starts off this psalm with some of these words of action. He's talking about our actions in worship here. He uses the word sing, shout, thanksgiving, which again is one of the words that means the lifting of hands. Extol, which is another high energy word, another word that means pour yourself out, be enthusiastic, be energetic in worship. So he starts off with that. And then he reminds us, he slows down a little bit, and he goes back and he reminds us of why we're doing this. Why are we worshiping? What are we doing here? And he reminds us in verse 3, "For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made that, and his hands formed the dry land." So he takes a moment in this middle of this admonishment to worship God, and he takes a moment to say, here's the reason we're worshiping God. Here's the why of it. And he reminds them of God's creativity, God's greatness, God's ownership of the earth. And then from there, he changes a little bit. He says he goes from these energetic actions of verses 1 and 2, and then he says, "Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care." And this is our first word that we're going to look at today, and this is the Hebrew word shakah. And the word shakah is a primitive root, and it means to bow down, or to crouch, or to fall flat, or to worship. The word is translated in all these different ways in different contexts throughout the Old Testament. And I think flipping your Bible over to Psalm 32 for just a minute, I think what he's getting at here, the attitude of heart he's getting at, is actually found in these three Psalms. Psalm 32, Psalm 38, and of course the most famous, Psalm 51. And this is the attitude of when people come to God and we see our sinfulness in the presence of God's perfect purity, and we see our weakness in the presence of God's unlimited power, and we see our limits in the presence of God's complete limitlessness. God has no limit. He goes on forever. His power is eternal. His power is amazing, miraculous. We think about that little verse we talked about yesterday in Genesis 1:16, where it says, he's talking about, God created the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night, and He created this and He created that. And then He gets to verse 16, He says, oh, I almost forgot. He also made the stars. Just an afterthought. Oh yeah, sun, moon, earth. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, He also made the stars. It's the Bible's greatest understatement. As if, He just snapped His fingers. Of course, he didn't snap His fingers that we know of. He spoke. He spoke the star. He had an idea in His eternal mind, and He said, I'm thinking about Ursula Major. I'm thinking about Centaurus. I'm thinking about these stars. Some of these stars are like a zillion times bigger than the sun. And He says, I'm thinking about this thing, and so I'm just going to say it. And it becomes. It happens. So in light of that God, in light of this God we come to, in light of this God that we worship, the appropriateness, the appropriate thing we do is we bow down before Him. And He says in Psalm 32, verse 1, Blessed is the one whose transgressions are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the one whose sin the Lord does not count against them, and in whose spirit is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy on me. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Then I acknowledged my sin to you. I didn't cover up my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. A number of years ago in America, there was a movement to take the song Amazing Grace. And the first line of that song is, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And there were a lot of people in America that didn't like the use of the word wretch. They felt like that was too negative. They felt like, what do you mean I'm a wretch? And I don't know how well this translates in other languages. It means that you are completely beyond redemption, basically, that you are an absolute unholy mess. That's maybe the best way to describe it in the English language. And people didn't like that. Or they said, could we say that Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a guy like me? Or maybe that saved a man like me, or saved a woman like me, or saved a person like me. They wanted to take away the negative connotation of wretch, because people just don't want to admit it. We just don't want to admit, as humankind, we do not want to admit that we are absolutely impoverished and desperately in need. Every single minute of every single day, we are desperately in need of the forgiveness of God in our lives. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I think the word's not strong enough. I think we need to find a better word. We need better words to help people understand the absolute inability of any person to come anywhere near the holiness of God in our complete and absolute unholiness. And so we're going to leave that song alone. People don't want to accept it in the presence of an awesome and holy God. We are puny and unholy. And so He says, come, let us bow down in worship. I think the very act of bowing, the physicality of the physical nature of bowing, helps us get in touch more with where we are in the presence of God. Now, I don't think any of us is going to get anywhere near it, understanding-wise, until we actually see God. When we see Him, we're going to get it. We're going to say, oh my. Yeah. No matter how deep we get in this life, we'll see how wretched we really are outside of Christ when we see Him as He is. And so that's our first idea, and something that we need to remember when we go to God in our quiet times. He says, when we acknowledge our sins to the Lord and we don't cover up our iniquity. I mean, this is why Jesus tells us in the prayer to confess our sins to Him. and to lead us not into temptation. We want to, and when we pray, we need to do this every single time we pray. God, I see my sin. In the last 5 hours, I have sinned in these ways. And in the last day, I've sinned in these ways. Please forgive me. And we acknowledge those things to Christ. We acknowledge those things to God. And He forgives the guilt of our sin. I turn over to Psalm 1. Psalm 1. This is our second word of the day. He says in verse 1, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in His law he meditates day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. Whatever they do prospers." And he's focusing here on this idea of meditation. And the Hebrew word in this particular instance, there's a number of words that are used in this context, but this word is the word Hagah. And Hagah means to ponder, to imagine, to meditate, or mourn, or even mutter, to kind of talk to yourself. And David, in describing this man who's blessed by God, shows him to be a person who delights in God's Word and who meditates on it, he says, day and night. Now, when we think about meditation, meditation is not really something that we associate with the Western world. We think of meditation and we kind of think about this guy, and he's hovering there in midair, and he's wearing peach-colored robes, and he's, and he's got finger symbols on his fingers, and we think of this as meditation. Now, the Eastern mystic, what this guy is after, what he's trying to do, is that he's trying to empty himself. And that's the concept of Eastern meditation. You want to empty yourself. That is completely opposite of biblical meditation. In biblical meditation, what we're trying to do is to fill ourselves. We fill ourselves with the teachings of God. We fill ourselves with the knowledge of Christ. We fill ourselves with the greatness of God's creation. We fill ourselves with the understanding of God's grace. And the more we fill ourselves, the more we crowd out sinful thoughts. We expel them out of our lives. It's like if you have a fly in your glass of water, and that fly represents sin, and the water represents thoughts of God, and you don't want to drink that fly, you don't want to eat that fly, and so you're going to keep pouring water in that glass, and eventually those thoughts, that water is going to fill that glass up, and the fly is going to fall on out. And that's what we do in Christian meditation. We wrap our minds around the concepts of God. We take a concept and we think about it. We're going to talk about how to meditate in a minute. God commands Joshua, when he takes over the leadership in the book of Joshua, God says to Joshua in chapter 1, verse 8, "Do not let this book of law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." Flip back over to Psalm 77. Or flip over to Psalm 77. And I want to talk for a minute about two spiritual benefits of Christian meditation. And again, we're talking about your relationship with the Lord here, your walk with God. And I want to talk about that. I can talk about this first one very intimately, because my father, who died very early, was bipolar. He was a manic depressive. I don't know how that translates exactly, but he was subject to, he had high highs and low lows. He was either euphorically, he was either unrealistically optimistic or he was suicidally depressed. And so he was a man of very extremes. Manic depression is all over my family. This bipolar nature is all over my family. And when I was about 35 years old, I had an episode of depression. I got very depressed, and I couldn't really figure out why, because my life was great. I had a great wife, I had great kids, I had a relationship with God, I had all the things that, we enjoy as Christians. And yet I would wake up in the morning and there would be this rain cloud over my head, and I was just feeling so despondent. And so I was wrestling with this, and of course by that time I'd fallen in love with the Psalms. And at some point along the road I discovered a number of Psalms that really helped me understand this. He says in Psalm 77, I cried out to God for help. I cried out to God to hear me. When I was in distress, I sought the Lord. At night I stretched out untiring hands, and I would not be comforted. I remembered you, my God, and I groaned. I meditated, and my spirit grew faint. Down to verse 10. Then I thought, to this I will appeal. The years when the Most High stretched out his right hand. I will remember the deeds of the Lord. Yes, I will remember your miracles of long ago. I will consider all your works and meditate on all your mighty deeds. And what I learned about myself is that when I feel that way, when I get depressed, when I'm tempted to be depressed, I just take time, I step away, and I get back into the Bible, and I grab hold of some truth, some Bible truth, and I meditate on it. I roll it around, and we'll talk about how to do it in just a minute, but I take time to think about it, and I find that after that episode, that 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, however long I need, and I sing songs about heaven, and I sing songs about hope, and then I pop up, and I'm not depressed anymore. Now, I think, in some cases, people who are predisposed to bipolar disorder, I think sometimes they need medication. I was pretty close to going to the doctor to get medication to see if I could get out of my funky sort of way of thinking. But when I started doing this, I found that I could extricate, God would extricate me from those feelings of despondency and depression if I just took the time to meditate. And this is one of the great spiritual benefits. Look over in Psalm 63. Psalm 63. When times get difficult, when life is difficult, as it was in David's life here when he was in the desert of Judah, this became his fuel for joy. Verse 1 he says, "O God, you God are my God, earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you, my whole body longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. I've seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory, because your love is better than life. My lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I'll lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied, as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me." And he goes on there and he talks about this whole idea of clinging to God no matter how difficult time. This is very interesting. He's probably, at this time, not probably, he's living in a cave. Absalom has rebelled against him. His own son has conducted a coup and has thrown him out of Jerusalem. So the day before, he's living in this opulent, beautiful palace, sleeping on giant cushions and enjoying life with his 8 wives. And, he's having this, people bringing him food and bringing everything. that he needs, and now today he's living in a cave and his pillow is a rock. And I don't know, he's eating locusts and wild honey. Who knows what he's eating at the time. And here's what he says. He says, I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I'll lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. He's eating bugs, but he's satisfied as with the richest of foods. He's drinking water, but it's as if he has fine wine because he's close to God. And so meditation and worship is fuel for joy when times get difficult. You know, God never promises us an easy life. Every single one of us is going to go through the fire. You know, we get old. We die. The death rate is still 100%. Everybody who's born dies. You're going to die. Unless Jesus comes back in your lifetime, you're going to die. And I'm going to die before any of you die. Because I'm way older than you are. And so we wonder, how's that going to happen? Is it going to be painful? Is it going to be quick? Is it going to be long? Is it going to be a long, slow disease? Or is it going to be quick? You know, in the middle of the night, you know, I pop a blood vessel. How's it going to be? I don't know. Who knows? I just know it's going to happen. But you know what? That's okay. Because whatever that little experience is, that little few moments or few weeks or few months of unpleasantness, that moment when we pass on, we're going to say, oh, I get it now. Oh, this is what it is. Awesome! And so it's a short travel to a glorious future. What's the worst that can happen? What's the worst that can happen? I could die. Well, that's not bad. That's great. For us, for you and I, we don't mourn like the rest of people who have no hope. We rejoice when people pass. And we miss them certainly in our earthly selves, but we don't as we go on. Now let's talk about the how-to. How do we meditate? We're not exactly sure how to go about that. You know, we fidget and our mind wanders, and we want to do something with our hands. Our society is so fast-paced and image-driven, and the idea of taking time away to really just get down into thinking, into meditating, we don't really know how to do that. So we're gonna learn how to do that today. Robert Weber says this. Robert Weber is considered the father of American church worship. He has taught on the subject. If you have not read a lot on worship, he's a great writer, and he's died now, but he's written some great things on it. He says this: God wants us to internalize Him, to take Him into ourself, into our mind, our soul, our spirit, our will. For this reason, it is important for us to take time before worship begins to be quiet, to meditate, and to prepare to meet our God. Now we're gonna go and we're gonna learn how to do this from the cow. The cow is going to be our teacher today. And the cow is an animal that, as we take a deeper look at him, the cow is blessed with a 4-chamber stomach. And so what he does, and they call a cow a ruminant. And a ruminant he's called this way because of the way his digestive system works. And the way it works is a cow, you know, reaches down and he gobbles up some grass, and he chews the grass up, and then he swallows it. And when he swallows it, it goes into the first chamber of his stomach, which is called the rumen, which is right here. And it sits there for a while in the rumen, and then, I hope you haven't eaten recently, he regurgitates it, and he chews it some more. And what happens is it goes in the rumen and it begins to break down, and nutrients go in one direction or the other, and then it goes back to his mouth and he regurgitates it, and then he chews it a little bit more, and then he swallows it again, and the second time it goes into the reticulum, which is that area right there. And what happens in the reticulum is that he breaks it down a little bit more. His stomach, some different enzymes hit it, and he breaks it down some more, and those nutrients go to other parts of his large, rotund body. And then she, I shouldn't say he, she. And then she chews on it some more, and she swallows it once again, and it's further digested, and it goes into the omasum right here. And then she regurgitates it and chews a little bit more, and then it goes back into the abomasum right here. And then part of it goes and fuels the cow, and part of it gets sent on through the intestines, and we don't want to step on where the rest of it lands. And that whole process is called ruminating. And that's a word, I don't know if that's a word in other languages like it is in English, but the English word ruminate, which comes from this process, means to chew on something. You know, in other words, I think about something about God. I think about God's power. All right? So let's say I read in my Bible, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of His hands. And I'm thinking, okay, now I need to get my mind wrapped around that a little bit. So I'm going to think about it. I'm going to swallow it. I'm going to chew it up a little bit, and I'm going to think about that thing. All right. So what am I going to think about? The heavens declare the glory of God. Well, I'm going to need to understand something about the sun. The sun is this amazing atomic nuclear generator that burns up, I don't know, I've studied this out and I don't remember the exact numbers, but every single minute it burns millions of tons. There's millions of tons of things that work together to produce energy. There's all these processes going on in the sun. And of course it's, millions of times larger than the earth. And so that sun, it hasn't run out yet. I drive in my car, I drive a Toyota Prius, and I get really good gas mileage in my Prius. I get 46 miles to the gallon. And so I can drive that thing for 400 miles on 8 gallons of gas, and it just keeps on going and going and going. It's like the ever-ready bunny. You have the ever-ready bunny in Europe? I don't know if you have that. It just keeps on going. Keeps on going and going and going. The sun has been going and going and going for how, depending on how you look at biblical history, however many years it's been going, but it's not run out yet. The heavens declare the glory of God. The stars proclaim the glory of God. It was this thought process that led me to understand how many stars is 300 sextillion. And I had a Yale-educated mathematician do the math for me because I couldn't figure out the zeros. And he came up with this number, 42,860,000,000,000 stars per person based on a world population of 7 billion. Every single one of us would get almost 43 trillion stars. We don't even know what that number means. I think I read, if you were to try to count to 1 trillion by saying one number every second, 1, 2, 3, to count to 1 trillion would take you 32 years. Well, you got 43 trillion stars. You going to count all those up? Well, you're going to have to get through a lot of lifetimes because you're going to have to be counting for hundreds and hundreds of years just to count the number of them. Again, that's a meditation thing. Wrap your mind around that. Understand, He also made the stars. Understand what that means. Or maybe it's the grace of God. You want to wrap your mind around this idea of the grace of God. And so you think about, okay, how can I understand the grace of God? Well, in order for me to understand the grace of God, I need to wrap my mind around how many times I've sinned in my life. Oh, that's a hard one. So I look at the sins in the New Testament, and I find in my own analysis of all the lists of sins, I find that there are 62 different kinds of sins in the New Testament. 62 kinds of sins. So I take that 62 kinds of sins, and I put a check mark by every one that I've done. And I hit 61 of them, and I've never done murder. But most of the rest of them, see, I've not done murder and I've not done homosexuality, but all the rest of them I've done. And so I got 60 sins, and let's say I've been sinning since I was 10 years old that I know of, and I'm 56. Am I 56 or 57? I'm 56. I'm 56 now. So I've been sinning for 46 years, times 365 days, times 60 sins, times however many times I've done those in a day. And I come up, in my own personal sinful nature, I come up with hundreds of thousands of sins that I've committed. Hundreds of thousands of sins. And the grace of God says, I'm going to completely obliterate your record. I'm going to take all those sins away from you. I'm going to take those sins and I'm going to bury them in the deepest part of the ocean. The Mariana Trench, which is, I don't know, 7 miles under the ocean. I'm going to bury those things so deep, they're going to get crushed and pulverized, and they cease to exist in my mind. And so God doesn't see it anymore. That's grace. When I understand the chasm, the difference, if I've got my sinfulness here and I've got God's wondrous perfection here, and when I understand the chasm, the valley, the Grand Canyon between my sin and God's holiness, that's how I measure grace. That's how we understand it. You got to think about that. That doesn't come easily. Deep spiritual insight does not come easily. It does not come without a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. You got to take time. You got to take this idea and you got to chew it up. You got to reason with it. You got to work it through. And then you regurgitate it. You just set it aside for a little bit. And then you come back later in the day and you take that thought in and you start where you left off and you take that thought in and you reason it out, you think about it, you understand it, you study it, you look at it, you read about it, and then you set it aside again, and then you come back later that week and you do some more ruminating. You chew it a little bit more. And gradually over time, you begin to develop incredibly profound spiritual insights. And it's a wondrous thing as you get deeper and deeper. And I think we'll spend all of our lives taking things a little bit deeper. And then when we see God, we'll understand how shallow we were. No matter how deep we get in this life, we're still in the shallow end of the pool. And we'll get into God's great ocean of wisdom later when we get a new brain that we can understand it all with. But for right now, we do the best we can with what we got. There are no quick roads. You have to take the time to develop and to think and to get deeper. Now let's talk about this word Selah. This is the transliterated Hebrew expression that's found frequently in the Psalms. And if you have your Old Testament, flip on over to the book Habakkuk, chapter 3. We get a good illustration of this in Habakkuk. And actually, unfortunately, my version does not have the Selah for some reason, but I know where it happens. That's interesting. Okay, yeah, right in the middle. They've got to know. They gave me a footnote saying where it should be, but they didn't put it in there. So, I don't know. It should be there. Why don't they put it there? Who knows? And so again, the word Selah is in the Hebrew, these are the literal definitions, a suspension or pause of music or lyrics or a musical interlude. And it's put in this piece of musical poetry to enable people, to allow people to meditate and to ruminate on the truth of the passage. And so the pause was likely used to encourage a quietness of spirit and to allow people to focus on the lyrical meaning of what they've just been singing or reading or saying. And so, for example, we'll look at a couple of, an example of this. We get Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 1. And in we'll start reading in verse 2. He says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah. And so the author there wants us to stop and to pause and to think about that. Okay, I've heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. What deeds of God do you stand in awe of? I don't know what they are. Why don't we get some thought about that? I want you to think for a minute. If you said to me, or if you said to God in your prayer, God, I stand in awe of your deeds, and then you are going to describe to me what deeds you stand in awe of, what would you say?
A little baby.
A little baby. The miracle of birth. Wow. That's a miraculous thing, the way God knits that little baby together in his mother's womb. Tina?
Christ's sacrifice.
Christ's sacrifice. What an awesome, awesome thing. GP?
God's creation, well, in particular, the sky and the earth and how everything is.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's so awesome to meditate on that. Esmond?
I was talking a little bit yesterday about the complexity of the human brain.
Oh,
Like all the things that he has built into us.
amazing.
We're looking specifically at all the different mechanisms, all the things that happen in our brain when we sing.
Oh, it's
miraculous. He built all this into our brain for us to sing.
Yeah. Yeah, I read a book which described that, and I actually reproduced some of that section in my book, because it's so amazing that if you're a worship leader, man, your brain is firing a zillion times a second. I mean, so many all the different parts of your brain are, memories coming in, and motor skills is coming in, and vocal and auditory and everything, and all these different parts of your brain are ding, 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 ding. They're all lit up when we sing. And it's really a miraculous thing. This 3-pound mechanism that sits on top of our shoulders. And some of us use only 1 pound of it, and some of us use 4 ounces of it. But musicians have to use a lot of it. So, any other thoughts? You stand in awe of
sunset. The sunset.
the sunset. I love sunsets. Sunsets are so amazing. God paints the sky differently every single day. Think about it. If God didn't really love us, He could have made everything shades of gray. Grass is dark gray, sky is light gray, hair is gray, skin is gray, eyes are different shades of gray. He could have made everything gray, but instead He made flowers, and He made sky. Sky is blue, and grass is green, and sunsets are golden and magenta and fuchsia, and so many beautiful colors because of the incredible creativity. And not only creativity, but how much God cares about making us happy. Music. Think of the way music lifts your spirit. What a glorious thing. Imagine if we all just talked monotonely, and we all just came together like this, and your favorite pop songs were like this, and there was no rhythm, there was no music, and there was no harmony, and everything was like this. And this is sort of like Eastern meditation. Imagine life would be so poor. But life is not. Life is rich. He goes on, he in verse 4 he says, His splendor was like the sunrise, rays flashed from His hand. And he goes all the way down there to verse 9 and says, You uncovered your bow and you called for many arrows and you split the earth with rivers. Selah. And now He wants us to pause. And He wants us to take all that in, and He wants us to reason with that a little bit. And think about that a little bit, and let those thoughts stay in our heads for a little bit. And then he jumps into verse 11. He says, Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows. And he finishes up that passage in verse 13, about the middle of verse 13. It's Selah. And once again, there's a pause. And we take that pause and we get into understanding a little bit about God. I want us to take a couple of minutes here. This is a video I found a couple of years ago, which takes us on a journey through space. And I want you to think about, those of you who understand the English here, I want you to try to grab hold of something, and I want to talk about it a little bit, but I want to just use this next 6 minutes or so for us to do a little bit of meditating together on the greatness of God's creation, and to think about that. and to understand a little bit about the awesome nature of God.
Let us travel now at the speed of light, departing from our home star on a trip across the cosmos toward the edge of the known universe. Our imaginary journey begins at midnight on January 1st, when we prepare to launch into space at the speed of 186,000 miles per second. We quickly pass the orbits of Mercury, Venus, and span the 93 million miles that separate the Earth from the Sun in just 8 minutes, 19 seconds. We continue on, passing Mars, then the gas giant planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Finally, after 5 hours and 31 minutes, we race past Pluto and its companion moon. Our journey has taken us more than 3.5 billion miles to the outer limits of our solar system. And it's still January 1st. Now we alter our flight path and travel in a direction perpendicular to our galaxy. Behind us, the 9 planets and the Sun quickly vanish from sight. The emptiness of space is broken only by the light of stars so distant they do not yet appear to move. A year passes, then 2 years, 3, 4 years. Finally, on April 19th of the 5th year, we reach Alpha Centauri, the nearest star to our solar system. We've traveled more than 25 trillion miles, and our journey has scarcely begun. We are now 10 light years from the Sun, far enough out in space that the stars within our galaxy appear to converge. 100 light years from the Sun, patterns of gas and nebulous material from the arms of the Milky Way fill our view. 1,000 light years. The galaxy's arms and disks become more defined. Yet it is not until we have traveled at the speed of light for 100,000 years that the entire spiral shape of the Milky Way is recognizable. From here on, each point of light we see is no longer an individual star, but an entire galaxy composed of billions of stars. "5 million years after beginning our journey, the Milky Way is seen as part of a cluster of about 30 galaxies, known as the Local Group. "50 million light years out, we encountered the large Virgo cluster, containing more than 2,000 galaxies. And so it goes, as our travels continue to take us deeper into the cosmos. We pass cluster after galactic cluster, each a building block of a far greater framework. A billion years pass. 5 billion. Finally, after 10 billion years, we decelerate and pause to observe a theoretical view of the universe's large-scale structure. countless billions of galaxies are now seen to comprise chains, masses, and thread-like structures that stretch across the cosmos, separated by enormous regions of empty space. It is a spectacular tapestry, so vast and diverse in its design that the power of its creator must truly surpass all human understanding.
Did anything stand out to you in that at all? The thing that I just laugh about is you travel for 5 million years at the speed of light, and you get to the group that they call the local cluster. Now, you know, I live in a little town in the Chicago area, and we go over to we have a little everything. You can walk to everything from our house, restaurants and little things. There's a little grocery store about a mile away, and that's local to me, right? Yeah, I think it's something. If I can walk to something, it's local. And so I walk to the little restaurant, or I walk to the coffee shop, or I walk different places, and that's local. But in space, you have to travel at 186,000 miles per second for 5 million years to get to the coffee shop. I mean, truly, and I love what he said there at the end, that the power of the Creator is beyond human comprehension. And that's what we understand. I want to share with you a song, and I want to use this song. Some of you might be familiar with this. It's from an old Church of Christ, or it's an old songbook song that is called "My Jesus, I Love You," or "My Jesus, I Love Thee" is the way it's done in the songbook. But I've added a little bit to it, and added a little chorus and that sort of thing. But I want us to really think about this. Is one of these songs that is it's vertical in nature, and it's a prayer song. And so I want to sing it with you and look that off there. That's cool. It's very simple. Those of you who play. Want to sing along, it's "My Jesus, I Love You." I think you have the lyrics there. My Jesus, I love you. I know you are mine. For you all the follies of sin I resign. My gracious Redeemer, my Savior, my crown. If ever I love you, my Jesus, it's now. I love you because you have first loved me. Purchased my pardon on
on